The day I got the keys to my new house, I cried in the car before even unlocking the door. Not because the house was huge or luxurious, it wasn't. It was a modest 3-bedroom place at the end of a quiet street with peeling white paint on the fence and a maple tree in the yard that leaned slightly to the left. But it was mine. Every late shift, every weekend I sacrificed, every vacation I skipped had led to that moment. I had grown up sharing a cramped apartment with my parents and my younger sister, always being told that I needed to set an example. I worked harder than anyone I knew because I believed one day it would all be worth it. When I finally walked inside, the house smelled like fresh paint and dust. The rooms were empty except for echoes. I stood in the living room imagining a gray couch by the window, bookshelves along the wall, maybe a small piano in the corner one day. For the first time in my life, I felt safe, independent, free. My parents didn't react the way I expected when I told them I bought a house. There was no celebration dinner, no proud smiles. My mom simply said, "That's nice," in the same tone she used when I told her I'd gotten a new pair of shoes. My dad asked how much I paid, then whistled and said, "You could have helped your sister with that money." My sister, Nadia, had married young and had 2 kids within 3 years. Her husband bounced between jobs, always promising a big opportunity that never came. They lived in a small rental apartment and constantly struggled with bills. Growing up, my parents always treated Nadia like she was fragile glass, something to be protected and excused. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need help. Still, I invited them all to see the house a week later. I thought maybe once they saw it, they'd understand what it meant to me. They came over on a Sunday afternoon. Nadia immediately started commenting on the space. "It's so big," she said, walking into the second bedroom. "The kids would love this room." I laughed awkwardly. "It'll probably be my office." She raised an eyebrow. "Office? That's a waste." My mom walked into the kitchen and started opening cabinets like she was inspecting a hotel room. "You'll need better curtains," she said. "And this yard is too empty." My dad stood in the living room and nodded slowly. "It's a good investment," he said. "Family should benefit from it." I didn't think much of that comment at the time. 2 months later, I had to travel for work for 3 days. It was my first big project as a team lead, and I was nervous but excited. I locked every window and door before leaving and even asked my neighbor, Mrs. Khan, to keep an eye on the place. The trip went well. I felt like my career was finally moving forward. On the flight back, I kept thinking about coming home, about sitting on my couch with takeout and enjoying the quiet. When I pulled into my driveway that night, I froze. There was a minivan parked in front of my garage. Not just any minivan, my sister's. At first, I thought maybe they were visiting. But the porch light was on, and I didn't remember leaving it on. I got out of the car slowly, my stomach twisting. As I approached the door, I noticed something else. The lock had been changed. My key didn't fit. I stood there in disbelief, trying the key again and again like it might magically work. That's when the door opened from inside. My mother stood there, wearing an apron. "Oh good, you're back," she said casually. "We were wondering when you'd arrive. Why doesn't my key work?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Oh, we changed the locks," she replied. "It's safer. You never know these days." I pushed past her into the house. My furniture was rearranged. The living room now had children's toys scattered across the floor. The second bedroom, my office, was painted light blue, with bunk beds against the wall. Family photos I had never seen before hung where my artwork used to be. Nadia walked out of the kitchen holding a mug. "Hey," she said brightly. "Surprise. What is this?" I demanded. Dad appeared from the hallway. "No need to shout," he said firmly. "Your sister and her family needed a place to stay. The landlord raised the rent. So you broke into my house?" I asked. "We didn't break in," my mom snapped. "We're your parents. We had a spare key. You changed my locks." Dad crossed his arms. "It's temporary. Don't be dramatic." "Temporary?" My voice cracked. "This is my house." Nadia sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "You live alone. We're 4 people in a tiny apartment. This just makes sense." "Then ask me," I said. "You don't just move in." Mom shook her head. "If we asked, you would have said no." She wasn't wrong. That night, I slept in what used to be my bedroom, now half filled with my niece's stuffed animals. I barely closed my eyes. Every creak of the floor reminded me that something sacred had been taken from me. The next morning, I tried to have a calm conversation. This can't continue, I said at breakfast. You can't just live here without my permission. Dad put down his newspaper. We are family. Family doesn't talk about permission. Family also doesn't break into someone's home. Nadia's husband, Kareem, finally spoke. We're saving money, he said. Once I get my new business running, we'll move out. What business? I asked. He hesitated, still figuring that out. I felt the walls closing in. Over the next week, I realized they had no intention of leaving. Packages addressed to Nadia started arriving. The kids were enrolled in a nearby school. My parents acted like they were doing me a favor by managing the house while I worked. One evening, I overheard my mom telling a neighbor, "We bought this house for the family. Our son is just helping." That was the breaking point. I drove to a lawyer's office the next day. I didn't want to sue my family. I didn't want drama. I wanted my house back. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained everything. He didn't look shocked. "You'd be surprised how often this happens," he said. "You are the sole owner. What they've done is illegal." Hearing the word illegal attached to my parents felt surreal. We started with a formal eviction notice. When I handed the papers to my dad that evening, his face turned red. "You're choosing strangers over your blood," he shouted. "I'm choosing my rights," I replied. My mom burst into tears. "After everything we sacrificed for you." "I sacrificed too," I said quietly. For years, Nadia refused to speak to me. Kareem muttered under his breath about betrayal. The next 30 days were tense. They tried guilt. They tried anger. They tried reminding me of childhood stories where I'd promised to always take care of family. But I stayed firm. When the final day came, they still hadn't packed. That's when I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I called the police. Watching officers stand in my living room felt like a scene from someone else's life. My parents looked at me as if I'd become a stranger. The officers were calm but clear. They explained the legal situation and supervised as my sister's family packed their belongings. My niece hugged me before leaving. "Are you mad at us?" she whispered. I knelt down and shook my head. "No, sweetheart, I just need my home back." When the door finally closed behind them, the house was silent again. But it didn't feel the same. It felt heavier. Over the next few days, I repainted the walls. I moved the furniture back. I took down the family photos they'd hung and replaced my artwork. I changed the locks again, this time installing a security system too. My parents didn't call for weeks. When they finally did, it wasn't to apologize. It was to say they were disappointed. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to fix it. "I love you," I told them. "But you can't control my life." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Eventually, something shifted. Months passed. Nadia and her family found another apartment. Kareem got a steady job. My parents slowly started speaking to me again, though the relationship was different now. There were boundaries. Real ones. One Sunday afternoon, my dad came by alone. He stood awkwardly on the porch until I opened the door. "I should have asked," he said quietly. It wasn't a full apology. But it was something. Owning a home isn't just about walls and a roof. It's about security. It's about building something that's yours. For years, I thought being the good son meant giving in. Letting things slide. Sacrificing comfort for peace. But I learned that love without respect becomes control. And control, even from family, is still control. Now when I sit in my living room under the soft light of a lamp I chose myself, I feel something stronger than pride. I feel ownership of my life. My house stands at the end of that quiet street, the maple tree still leaning slightly left, leaves rustling in the wind. It's not perfect. It's not the biggest on the block. But it's mine. And this time, everyone knows it. The first few weeks after my sister and her family moved out were strangely quiet. The silence wasn't peaceful at first, it felt like the aftermath of a storm. Every room carried a memory of what had happened. Scratches on the hallway wall from moving bunk beds. A faint crayon mark behind the living room curtain. A loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen where someone had forced it too hard. I thought getting the house back would instantly make everything feel normal again. It didn't. Instead, I had to rebuild the feeling of safety piece by piece. I started small. I changed every lock again, even the ones they hadn't touched. I installed a doorbell camera and motion lights in the yard. I met with a security company and added window sensors. Some people might have called it extreme, but for me, it was about control. About knowing no one could walk into my life uninvited ever again. Mrs. Khan, my neighbor, stopped me one evening while I was taking out the trash. "Everything okay now?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Yes, just family stuff." She gave me a knowing look. "Sometimes family forgets boundaries. You did what you had to." Hearing that from someone outside the situation helped more than she probably realized. Inside the house, I began reclaiming each room intentionally. The second bedroom, which had been painted blue for the kids, took 3 coats of white paint to cover. As I rolled the paint onto the wall, I felt like I was erasing more than just color. I was erasing the idea that my hard work automatically belonged to someone else. I turned that room into a proper office this time. A solid oak desk, a tall bookshelf, a framed certificate from my recent promotion placed right where anyone entering could see it. Not out of arrogance, but as a reminder. I earned this. Work became my anchor during those months. The project I had traveled for ended up being a success, and my boss began trusting me with bigger responsibilities. I stayed late at the office more often, not to escape my house, but to build something stable in another part of my life. For once, my energy wasn't being drained by family drama. Still, the tension lingered. My mother eventually started calling again, but the conversations were different. Shorter, polite, careful. One evening, she asked, "Are you eating properly?" "Yes." "Is the house okay?" "It's fine." There was a pause. "We never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. I didn't respond immediately, because the truth was, they hadn't thought about hurting me at all. They had thought about helping Nadia. In their minds, my success was a resource to distribute. My independence was optional. "I know," I finally said. "But you didn't think about me either." She didn't argue. A few weeks later, my sister called for the first time since everything happened. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "We found a 2-bedroom apartment," she said. "It's not perfect, but it's ours." "I'm glad," I replied. There was an awkward silence before she added, "The kids miss you." That hit harder than I expected. "I miss them too," I admitted. "I was desperate," she said suddenly. "When the rent went up, I panicked. Mom said you had space, and I just went along with it." "I didn't think you'd react like that." "You mean stand up for myself?" She exhaled slowly. "Yeah, it wasn't an apology exactly. But it was the closest we had come to honesty. Over time, we started rebuilding, not as siblings trapped in old roles, but as adults forced to reset expectations. I began visiting her apartment occasionally. It was small, but cozy. The kids had bunk beds again, but this time chosen by their parents. Nadia had taken a part-time job at a daycare center, something she'd never considered before. "I don't want to rely on anyone anymore," she told me one afternoon while we watched the kids play. I understood that feeling more than she knew. The biggest shift, however, happened with my father. He had always been the authority in our family. His word was final. Growing up, I never questioned him. Even when I disagreed, I stayed silent. So when he came over one Sunday carrying a small toolbox, I was surprised. "What's that?" I asked. "You said the cabinet hinge was loose," he replied. "Thought I'd fix it." We worked side by side in the kitchen without talking much. The sound of the screwdriver turning filled the quiet space. After a while, he said, "I was raised differently. In my day, what belonged to one belonged to all. I don't mind helping," I said carefully. "But help should be asked for, not taken." He tightened the final screw and leaned back. "You're not a child anymore." "No," I said, "I'm not." That conversation didn't magically repair everything. But it changed something fundamental. For the first time, he wasn't speaking to me as a subordinate. He was speaking to me as an equal. Months passed, and the house slowly became warm again, not just physically, but emotionally. I hosted a small dinner party for coworkers. I planted flowers in the yard near the leaning maple tree. I adopted a rescue dog named Milo, who now claimed the sunny spot near the living room window as his throne. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. The experience had forced me to grow in ways I never anticipated. I had always believed love meant sacrifice without limit. But what I learned was that unlimited sacrifice creates imbalance. It teaches people that your boundaries are negotiable. They aren't. My relationship with my family is different now. Healthier in some ways, more distant in others. We celebrate birthdays together. We exchange holiday gifts. But there's an understanding, unspoken yet solid, that my home is mine. And more importantly, my life is mine. A year after everything happened, I stood in my office, the same room that once held bunk beds and bright blue walls. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, lighting up the framed certificate on the wall. I thought about that night I came home to a changed lock. About the shock, the betrayal, the helplessness. Then I looked around at the desk I chose, the books I bought, the quiet I protected. Strength doesn't always come from dramatic victories. Sometimes it comes from signing papers you never wanted to sign. From making calls that break your heart. From choosing long-term respect over short-term peace. My parents once believed they could decide what was best for me without asking. Now they knock before entering. And that simple sound, the knock on my door, is the clearest proof that everything changed. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I finally started loving myself enough to draw the line.